Good morning and welcome to you all to the Institute for Government. My name is Akash Brown. I'm a senior fellow here and will be chairing today. And we are delighted to be working in partnership with the Political Studies Association on this event, briefing you all on the state of public opinion, political parties and local democracy in advance of this Thursday's local elections across much of England. We've got a panel of 3 experts who will be talking us through the polls, the state of the parties and what we might expect to see on Thursday night. Most of whom will need little introduction. First to speak will be Sir John Curtice. John is a professor of politics at Strathclyde University and is one of the country's leading experts on opinion polls and elections, and I think we'll be seeing more of him on Thursday night, those of us who are up watching the results come in. John, thanks for being with us. And John will be talking us through some of the numbers, the elections that are happening, what happened 4 years ago when these seats were last up for election and what the polls suggest may happen this time round. Second to speak will be, sitting to my left, Deborah Mattinson. Deborah is founder of the insight and strategy consultancy Britain Thinks and was formerly Chief Pollster to the Prime Minister and previously the Chancellor, Gordon Brown. And Deborah will be providing a hopefully nicely complementary analysis, looking at some of the more qualitative questions about the public mood, public attitudes towards the parties, political leaders and some of the main issues, not least including Brexit. And then finally I will turn to Arianna Giovannini, who's a senior lecturer at De Montfort University in Leicester, and Arianna will be talking about the wider state of local democracy, some questions about diversity of representation at the local level, and also about the some of the mayoral elections that will be taking place this Thursday, including the first election to the post of Metro Mayor of the Sheffield City region, which is quite an interesting job. We were just talking about it, a job apparently without a salary or any real powers, at least on day one, but potentially a step towards something more interesting and radical in the form of a devolution settlement for Yorkshire as a whole. So I'm quite interested in where that agenda goes. So I think that's all I need to say. Thank you all for joining us this fine Monday morning. Thanks to the panel for giving us their time. And first, delighted to introduce Sir John Curtice.
I demonstrate his unfamiliarity with Windows.
Yeah.
Wonderful, right, okay. Well, welcome to those of you who've not been diverted by the latest excitement caused by what is now a rudderless government, and are able to spend some time looking forward at least 72 hours, which I realise is an eternity for most journeys. I should warn you that this is a rather Anaraki presentation. So for those of you who are not used to Anaraki presentations, you might want to go and pick up a copy before you start. On the other hand, that sing will be in heaven probably. You probably know all this stuff already. But one of the crucial things I want to convey to you is that actually you do need to understand some of the Anaraki detail of these elections this year, because otherwise you are at serious risk of misinterpreting the actual results. The headlines could well prove seriously misleading, particularly if you are somebody who lives and operates and breathes in London and isn't aware that there's another country out there called England beyond the M25. Okay, what are this year's elections for? Well, first of all, they are, of course, for all 32 London boroughs. These are all whole council elections, and inevitably, therefore, these come across as the most exciting. because therefore if all the seats for a council are up to grab, inevitably there's rather greater probability, at least statistically, that the control of the council might change hands, whereas, which is the position in most, though not quite in all, of the councils outside of London that have elections. Most part, typically it's only for 1/3 of the council seats, therefore inevitably it's rather less likely that control is going to change hands. The councils that have elections outside of London are disproportionately urban, pretty much every, though not quite, a city of any size between Plymouth and Newcastle has an election, though Bristol doesn't, Leicester doesn't, Nottingham doesn't, but on the other hand, Birmingham, Leeds, Sheffield, those places that are in the Met districts all have elections this year. In total, 150 councils, of which, again, the other piece of finite detail you need to understand is that only around 2/3 of them are counting overnight. And also another crucial piece of detail you need to get, for reasons that become obvious in a moment, is that because London has whole council elections, for the most part, the results from London will be slow. So for those of you who are thinking that maybe you could just stay up to 2 o'clock, see what's going on, and then grab a few hours sleep, no. If you actually want your website to be up to date, you are going, I'm afraid, to follow it through to 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning, at least, as well as being willing to update on Friday afternoon. Well, there's then also one other crucial thing you need to realise. Because London has whole council elections, and the rest of the country, for the most part, doesn't, literally 42% of all of the seats that are up for grabs on Thursday are located in London. And one thing, therefore, you absolutely have to get into your head is that London does not constitute 42% of England. And if, as I'm going to argue, the result in London might prove to be different from that in the rest of England, headline totals of seats won and lost may seriously misrepresent the actual position of the political parties. Okay, now, another thing one needs to realise is that again, there's a lot of loose talk out there about how, well, governments lose ground when it comes to local government elections and the opposition gain ground. Well, the first thing to realise is partly because these seats were last defended when the Labour Party was already in opposition, and secondly because this is predominantly in urban England, there's not necessarily a great deal for the Labour Party to gain. These are already councils where literally around half of the councils are actually in Labour's control already. So that again potentially limits the extent to which there is movement. Similar picture when it comes to the number of seats up for grabs. The Labour Party is defending around 2,250 seats. The Conservatives only around 1,300, 1,400. But still, there's enough Conservative seats there being defended, potentially for the party to gain ground. There are normally 126 UKIP seats. Some of these people have already defected. Actually, probably there's only about 80 or so actually seats that are still being occupied by the local councillor. Notice also, occasionally referred to Liberal Democrats, but there aren't that many Liberal Democrat seats to defend. It's going to be quite difficult for the Liberal Democrats to lose lots of seats, even if they don't do that well, because they're not defending much, and much of what they're defending is very much in places like Cheltenham, South Lakeland, where they already are in control. First rule, of course, that you always need to understand with any set of local elections is to have in your head what happened the last time these seats were fought. The last time these seats were fought were, in most cases, in June 2014, on the same day as the European elections, which of course politically is moons ago. This is before David Cameron won a general election, before we had the EU referendum, and before Theresa May managed to lose her majority. This is politically a very, very different world. Not quite sure everywhere. There are some places where the last elections were in May 2016, but again it's pre-Brexit. And there are a few places where there are whole council elections outside of England, outside of London, where actually it's a mixture of 2014, 2015, 2016. But as I'm going to show you, 2016 and 2014 are very similar to each other, so it doesn't make too much difference. Anyway, where were we in 2014? We were already in a world in which both in the opinion polls that were conducted contemporaneously just in advance of the European, of the local elections, and also in the estimates of what the local election performance actually would have meant if there had been a general election, we are looking at a world at which the Labour Party was already narrowly ahead in public opinion. So the baseline is not repeat last year's general election. This is a better baseline for the Labour Party than last year's general election. Though that said, it is not a baseline that, if you look back at previous occasions when Labour Party has been in opposition, by the standards of what we would expect normally for a party opposition, still not that good. So to that extent, at least, if you take historical precedent as being relevant, then there arguably is still room for the party to gain ground. Other point to note right away, of course, this is still the world when UKIP was alive and kicking and could actually occasionally get wins in the occasional seat. The other thing to note, Liberal Democrats doing better. Liberal Democrats will always do better in local elections than their current general election standing, even if it's pretty miserable as it is at the moment. So do not, if the Liberal Democrats are running at 13, 14, 15%, this is simply treading water, okay? And if Vince Cable pops up and says, you know, and it looks like 13, 40%, we're making progress, you know he's talking porkies. The position in 2016 is not that dissimilar, except that the Tories were slightly ahead in the opinion polls, but the Labour Party was narrowly ahead in our projection of election performance. Again, Liberal Democrats 15%, and again, UKIP still alive and kicking. But this then is the crucial comparison, and this is one of the reasons why the very substantial commentary out there that says that the Labour Party is going to go walkies in these local elections does seem rather peculiar. Because if anything at the moment, and Mattinson will tell you my estimate's too small, but if anything, if you just take the average of the recent opinion polls, the Conservative Party looks as though it's slightly ahead. Now, crucial caveat, these polls are all of them pre-Windrush, and maybe or maybe not, we might want to discuss that afterwards, that will make a difference. But relative to the Conservatives, now, both the Conservatives and Labour are likely to gain ground. So another spin to look out for is when the Tories tell you, ah, look, but we've gained all these votes. Yeah, sure. But under the particular plurality system, as the Tories discovered last year, your absolute level of support is irrelevant, it's your relative level of support relative to your principal opponents. But the other implication of the fact that both Labour and the Tories are likely to gain votes, not least because of the collapse of UKIP, is that even if the Liberal Democrats tread water in terms of votes, they are likely to lose ground in terms of seats. That's what happened to them in last year's county council elections. So again, warning, do not presume that if the Liberal Democrats lose seats, they are therefore losing votes. It may simply be that their opponents have gained ground, because they're frankly going to have to make progress, probably, to hang on to everything that they have got. But you can see, therefore, that basically, I mean, big if the opinion polls are right, and if they are reflecting local elections, they're not always absolutely, then we might expect across the country as a whole a little bit of a swing to the Tories. And even if you think the opinion polls are a bit wrong, maybe at best the Labour Party is going to have a small lead. Yet, in London, upon which most attention has so far been focused, the opinion polls, such as they are, there are two from Queen Mary University done by YouGov, have been suggesting that indeed the Labour Party is going to go walkies in London. 14-point increase in its vote, according to the most recent YouGov poll, only a 5-point increase in the Tory vote, so we've got something like a 4.5–5% swing to the Labour Party across London as a whole. Liberal Democrats hanging on, UKIP disappearing. The Greens, that's probably going to be underestimated. Polls tend to not be very good at getting the votes of small parties. One crucial caveat about all of this. How big that swing is depends on how you measure the result last time. You must have thought it's impossible for it to be just disputed about how well the Labour Party did in the elections 4 years ago, but it is. Because remember, London has whole council elections, and voters can, if they wish, give one vote to the Conservatives, one vote to the Labour Party, and one vote to the Greens. And bear in mind also that the Greens in particular, and sometimes the Democrats, often they put up one candidate in a seat. So if you turn up as a voter and determine to vote for Greens, where you put next against the Greens, then you go, oh, hang on, we wanted more Green candidates, and some people therefore will come next against Labour or whatever. So Queen Mary's poll doesn't get into this subtlety at all, but Labour's share of all the votes cast in 2014 is about 43%. The share of the votes won by the most popular candidates, which is how this is calculated, is done by Mattinson Thrasher, is 38. So even here, there is actually uncertainty about exactly what the YouGov poll means when it comes to votes. But in any case, what we now have to bear in mind is Brexit. And that London voted very, very differently in the EU referendum 2 years ago, and that we know from both what happened in the general election last year and in the county council elections a few weeks beforehand, that the Brexit status of an area made a difference to how the parties fared. So this is last year's general election. In places where predominantly Remains on the left-hand side there, predominantly Remains on the left-hand side there, the Conservative vote actually fell back. On the contrast, in the places where over 60% voted to leave, there was a swing to the Conservatives compared to 2015. And in case anybody wants to think, oh, but that's a general election, what about local elections? Very similar pattern in last year's county council elections. There on the left-hand side are the most Remain places in the county council elections. Here on the right-hand side are the places which are most pro-Leave. They're one way or the other, I can't remember which way it is, but the crucial point is that the Tories are doing less well in Remain areas, doing better in Leave areas, and that evidence is there in the local elections as well. So therefore, and here's a straight, simple piece of mental arithmetic. If it is true, as YouGov anticipate, and if, as is also likely to be true, given what happened to London in London last year, given London's Brexit status, if there is indeed a substantial swing to the Labour Party in London, and if, and we're being generous here, there is no more than a small Labour lead in the opinion polls, it's almost arithmetically inevitable that there's probably going to be a swing against the Labour Party outside of London, across the piece. Because it's not going to be Scotland that's accounting for the swing to the Tories. We know that from the opinion polls in Scotland, etc. And there's enough, yes, maybe the Tories are doing particularly well in the rural parts of England that are not voting, but it's very unlikely that's going to account for all of it. So the crucial thing, therefore, to be looking out for is to what extent do London and the rest of England diverge. Now, within that, of course, there is then the question of, well, what might actually change. Now, the other misfortune for the Labour Party here is that, to be honest, there is very little easy fruit for the Labour Party to pick up London. So the Labour Party can win seats in London and end up with very little in the way of a headline council game. Supposedly, the easy one is Barnet. Of course, Barnet has a 15% Jewish population. If there's anywhere where anti-Semitism is going to cause Labour Party grief, it's going to be Barnet. And we know from last year's parliamentary election, the Labour Party did not do so well in those parts of London with a substantial Jewish population. Thereafter, people talk about Headington, but then forget that actually Headington is one of the few parts of London that voted to leave, so there's no necessary reason to expect that Headington to swing markedly towards the Labour Party. And then we come to Wandsworth and Westminster, but these swings are bigger than we would probably expect, even if you make a generous interpretation of the YouGov poll. Now, local variation may mean the Labour Party is lucky in the end and they pick up one or other of them. But frankly, conversely, if the Tories manage to lose both of those, they really have done more badly in London. But thereafter, once you start looking at places like Bromley, Brexit, they are so safe. It's very difficult to see how the Tories are going to lose them. Now, meanwhile, at the other end of the spectrum, well, actually, if the Labour Party is bad enough in Barnet, the Tories could actually pick it up. It needs virtually no swing. There's lots of split board outcomes in Barnet last time. Just the Tories do as well as last time, and the cookie crumbles to their advantage. They'll get it back from NOC because they, of course, have been controlling for the last 4 years until the council defected. Hammersmith and Fulham, no particular reason to expect the Tories to do well there, but it's their best hope. But on the other hand, they might hope to do better in Sutton, in the sense that Sutton again was another part of the London that voted to leave. But on the other hand, the Lord Democrats did manage to hang on to the parliamentary seat that they have there. So again, maybe, to be honest, the Tories may end up empty-handed. The Lord Democrats, for the most part, are focusing, and these are really their two best hopes virtually anywhere in the country. Richmond and Kingston, some of the rare parts of the country where the Democrats have managed to hoover up the Remain vote and to squeeze the Labour Party in a way that for the most part it's not generally been able to do. And you can see it doesn't need that big a swing for the Democrats to possibly pick it up. But again, do not assume that South West London is necessarily telling you about the rest of the world. So what you should be looking for outside of London? Well, again, there are some easy pickings for the Labour Party outside of London, even in areas which voted heavily to Leave. But notice, with the exception of Trafford, these are all Leave areas. Now, it's not Leave, very heavily Leave. The Labour Party, serious difficulty hanging on to the parliamentary seats there last year. But UKIP, there are a lot of UKIP seats before, and Labour Party could just simply get them, even if not particularly doing well, just the UKIP vote falling away. The ones I would suggest you should watch out for: Amber Valley, Kirklees and Walsall. These are places that, on a relatively small swing from the Conservatives, the Labour Party should probably pick up, although they probably in some cases need to pick up the odd seat from elsewhere as well. But these are all Leave areas. So if Labour is not beginning to pick up some of these, then you can probably anticipate the Labour Party has not made that much progress in provincial England. And do not be fooled by Trafford. The Tories may well lose control of Trafford, though Labour Party gaining control is much more ambitious. But Trafford is a Remain area. So it's the one Remain area outside of London where Labour Party has hopes. Conversely, that almost again, do not be fooled if the Tories make the odd gain outside of London. Again, you know, expect Brandon Lewis to divert your attention from London and want you to look outside of London. And there are a few places, so I mean, Peterborough is easily picked up for the Tories. So also is Rugby, just picking up a seat for the Democrats. And again, Basildon and Pendle, again, seats that the Tories could pick up without doing especially well, or just picking up seats from UKIP. So some Tory gains outside of London are likely, certainly if the Tories are just simply holding water vis-a-vis the Labour Party. And I think I did find one Liberal Democrat home, which was 3 votes, but anyway. Okay, so, first point then. There is no reason to anticipate a major swing in Conservative Labour or vice versa in these elections. Or if there is, it's going to be a surprise. There might be a small swing to the Labour Party across the country as a whole. There might be a small swing to the Tories across the country as a whole. If that's what happens, basically it will confirm what the opinion polls have been telling us where we are at. What there is every reason to anticipate, however, is substantial divergence between Remain and Leave vote in Britain, which therefore means that London is likely to move towards the Labour Party, but that the rest of England could still swing towards the Conservatives. And therefore, do not be surprised if on Friday afternoon you end up with the BBC coming up with a projected national share that actually perhaps has the Tories slightly ahead, even though they may have lost more seats and be losing ground in London. But the crucial point, therefore, just remember the tally of seat gains and losses is potentially seriously misleading because of the dominance of London. But equally, and conversely, the Labour Party just picking up Barnet will not necessarily tell you the Labour Party has not made progress in London. It's the Labour Party's misfortune in terms of council control. There isn't very much for the party to pick up, either in London and equally also conversely outside of London because of the 1/3 elections. And also then bear in mind that because both Labour and the Tories are probably going to be rising as compared to 2014, the decline in Liberal Democrat seats is probably to be anticipated, maybe not big numbers, maybe compensated by gains in Richmond and Kingston, but do not presume from that that therefore the Democrats have fallen back yet further. Or to put it crucially, beware simple narratives on Thursday night and Friday. Simple narratives will always be at serious risk of being wrong, and I'm sorry, you're going to have to look underneath the bonnet, you're going to have to look at the detail. If you're actually going to be able to challenge the spin put on by the parties effectively, and B, if you're going to give your readers an honest and decent account of what actually happens on Thursday.
Thanks very much for that, John. I'm sure there'll be questions for John, which we'll come to afterwards. Deborah is going to have to leave at about 9:45. So what I suggest is, if anyone has any questions for her following her presentation, we'll take them directly then before going to Arianna. So prepare your questions as you listen to Deborah. Right,
I found mine, I just don't know how to get it up. John, I'm not used to using...
There you go.
No?
And then, oh, that's the
Yes.
one. Whoops, sorry.
Yeah, I thought that was...
That one?
No. It's that one. Yeah.
That is...
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, okay.
That's fine. Lovely. Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. So, talking of looking underneath the bonnet, as John just was, this is what I'm proposing to do here. So, what I've got is much more qualitative. It's really looking at what are voters' views that are kind of underlying the numbers that John's just given you. I'm going to be looking at the overall mood. I'm going to be looking at views of Brexit and views of the parties. So, what are we worried about then? And just a little aside I was just saying to John, I was doing focus groups in Barnet last week, and Windrush did not come up once, just out of interest. So what are people worried about? Well, they are pretty worried. That's the first thing to say. On the left there is a word cloud, one of the first few things that spring to your mind when you think about the months ahead, and you can see people are pretty gloomy. 8 out of 10 say the British public is currently feeling pretty anxious. As one person said in one of the focus groups, the whole country is feeling anxious. It's about politics, it's about the EU. People feel that we're living in a very divided society. 8 out of 10 think that we need to do more to bring the country together. People think that it's likely to get more divided through this year, and you're more likely to think that incidentally if you're younger than older. And again, people think that's a bit about Brexit, but it's about other things as well. What we find is that younger people are much more gloomy than older people. They're particularly negative. They feel a very strong sense of injustice. 7 out of 10 tell us that they no longer think that if you work hard, that old mantra, you're going to get the rewards that you're looking for. They just don't believe that anymore. So here, well, in terms of the focus groups, we're looking at 18 to 30, so pretty young. They feel they physically can't work any harder. A lot of the people in our focus groups are doing several jobs, but they're just not able to get the things that they want. And interestingly, what this has led to is a kind of heightened sense of concern about benefit scroungers, a feeling of injustice, which typically, historically, younger people were more insulated from, but now not so much. Older people feeling a little bit more positive, but also very nostalgic about the past. They already have, of course, what those young people are after, stable incomes, owning their own homes, but they do have concerns. Their concerns, though, are more abstract than the young people's concerns. They're worried about homelessness. They're worried about their kids rather than themselves. But they feel this really strong sense of nostalgia for a kind of idyllic past. So this halcyon era where people had proper, brackets, manufacturing skills, where people were paid a fair wage for the job that they did, and where you could speak your mind without worrying about being called out for not being PC. And very often in our focus groups, the older people told us that it was their grandkids who were picking them up. And there's this great quote here, you know, you've got to be careful what you say these days. You can't say what you like anymore. The grandchildren are growing up and they're saying, Nan, you're being racist. So, Brexit is continuing to dominate, but it's not the only concern. Now, if we ask people what are the things that they're concerned about, Brexit is number one, NHS is number two, we ask a slightly different question, which is, what are you feeling most pessimistic about for the year ahead? And actually, we got housing and homelessness top, followed by the NHS, followed by Brexit, followed by the UK economy. So slightly different look at things there. How people feel about Brexit depends on which tribe you belong to. And Britain thinks we think there are 4 tribes rather than 2, actually. So we've got the diehards, which are the people who are absolutely 100% positive about Brexit. Cautious optimists who voted Brexit but still have a few underlying concerns. Accepting pragmatists who voted Remain were initially disappointed but have sort of come to terms with it. And then the devastated pessimists who are filled with gloom, can see absolutely nothing positive at all and feel quite bitter about the political establishment. And what we find is that there are some very stark divides that are played out across a number of demographic factors, particularly age and class. So you can see there how, how age impacts on people's likelihood to be one or other of those tribes, and also how classes. So basically, the younger you are, the more likely you are to be a devastated pessimist, and the more middle class you are, ditto. That said, and John has also talked about the importance of Brexit here, but I do just want to say one thing, which is that engagement with specific Brexit issues is extremely low, and most voters are very turned off. I was doing a focus group actually for the BBC with Laura Kunsberg, and her jaw hit the floor. We were doing a focus group to test what had come out of the negotiations the week before. Literally, nobody in the focus group knew that there had been negotiations the week before. And when I showed them the things to ask them how they responded, they were literally seeing them for the first time. And I think it's just worth having that in your head. So, what do people think? They think politics is boring at the best of times, and frankly there's been too much of it lately. They think Brexit has been going on for ages, and quite a lot of people said, we voted to leave, why haven't we left? It's extremely complex, and it's kind of very dog-eat-dog, it's he said, she said. I think one of the interesting things about all of this is that people voted Brexit, often for a different way of doing politics, to sort of move into a new political zone. Actually, what they've ended up with is the worst of all the things that they feel about politics. It's everything they hate about politics, magnified 1,000 times. As long as I said, the process is everlasting, tedious, and confusing. So, just an interesting point of difference though. Not much has changed actually on Brexit, but here's one thing that has changed, and this is a year ago. Our Leavers and Remainers were almost from different planets. So you can see here are the Remainers, they're full of gloom, everything's confusing and uncertain, but look at the Leavers, there's some sort of moments of joy there. It's about change, it's about freedom, it's about independence. We ask the same question a year on, and actually it's hard to tell who is the Leaver and who is the Remainer, because everybody can see the downsides, and the upsides have just disappeared from the Leavers' frame. And in fact, everybody thinks that progress has been poor. If you're a Leave voter, you give it 4.5 out of 10. If you're a Remain voter, you give it 3.9. No difference there. There's very little confidence in the final deal that government negotiates being a good one. Obviously, if you're a devastated pessimist, you're 80% of us think there's any chance of that. But even 49% of those diehards, just 49%, are the people that think it's going to go well. I expect you've all seen this slide, but I include it in almost everything I do these days. I think it's just so important to remember that those Brexit tries are about so much more than attitudes to the EU. This is something that Lord Ashcroft did. I think it's fantastic. It's the isms chart, as I call it. So are all these isms a force for ill or a force for good? And basically, what you can see is that if you're a Leave voter, that's about how you feel about things like feminism, globalisation, environmentalism, all those isms. And if you're a Remain voter, you feel quite differently. So, where does that leave us in terms of views of the government and the opposition? And John's talked about this across the country. We're pretty much neck and neck. But what's underlying that? What do the focus groups tell us? So some of this is just from the work that I did last week. So Theresa May, weak and stubborn. She's a kind of Thatcher wannabe. She doesn't have a vision of her own, not least on Brexit. But her party are survivors. So if we look at the words that are about her, stubborn, weak, unstable, but look at the words that people are using to describe the Tory party. Yes, it's uncaring, but it's also strong, unflappable, ruthless, together. The animals, so her animals are deeply unflattering. She's weak. She's an animal that's arrogant because she underestimates her opposition, and she's a goat because she's stubborn. What kind of animal is the party? Well, it's an elephant. That's more flattering than you might think, actually, in some ways. What do people say? They're uninspiring, conservative, the clue's in the name, but they may be a safe pair of hands. They're powering through. And then look at Labour. So, On the left of the slide, appropriately enough, you've got Corbyn. He's grounded and strong, but he's also a little bit untrustworthy, a bit naive. If he was an animal, he's a koala. Now he's cuddly, but also maybe he's got a kind of little bit of steel running through him. Vicious and strong, gets what he wants. But the party, less so. The main word that people use when they talk about the party was divided. Yes, it's fair, but it's also divided. The animal, they're like a pack of dogs. All that infighting is horrible. So, just finally then, what does this mean for May, for Thursday? And I think, what a local, I mean, obviously they deliver local government, but they also potentially deliver some momentum to the parties. They're able to boost and unite your own troops. If you're thinking about this, this really matters. And expectation management is absolutely key. And my observation would be that Labour seems to be not really engaging in this. I'm not hearing very much from Labour. They're not really playing that game. Now, maybe this is going to work out for them. It's hard to see how. While the Tories, who are making all the noise here, have set their own bar very low, Bexley, which, as John has just said, I think really should be assured that something's gone seriously badly wrong if they can't hold on to Bexley. But they're saying this is how we measure success, where they've set Labour's bar very high. And I think there are a lot of people, Labour sort of activists included, who actually think that Wandsworth and Westminster are within their sights. Maybe they are, but I'm struggling to see it. So I think that what we could end up with is a reasonably good set of results for Labour, actually looking quite problematic, particularly against that background of division, while the Tories ride out difficulties again, and I put again in brackets on this slide before this weekend, so again and again. But I think maybe the way they manage this does have some very interesting implications for the next general election, 2022, we assume, because it just might be that the Tories are better placed to ride that out.
Deborah, and as I said, if you've got any questions specifically for Deborah, I'll take them now. Yes, so I saw the gentleman there and then here.
Mattinson on Country Politics. Just quite fascinated by your word cloud on how Remainers and Leavers were feeling about how Brexit was going. On the question, on the matter of whether Brexit was actually the right thing, whether they still believe in it, do you get the sense from your focus groups that by and large, Leavers haven't really shifted, or the opinion hasn't really shifted in the way that the quant evidence suggests?
Yeah, in terms of the actual vote itself, there's very little. There's almost no movement. You can see that in the polls. You don't need my focus groups to tell you that. But I think what's interesting is that Leavers have lost that sense of joy and optimism. And what's happened is that the whole thing's become very bogged down in process. And that's just left people cold, so nobody's really looking at it, which means that everybody is really quite pessimistic.
So the crucial point is that Leave voters blame the politicians, they don't blame themselves. The choice was still right, the politicians were ready to deliver, which is why the Remain side